Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Economics. How are you all doing? I hope you all are doing good. Today I wrote for you all February March 2026 0455 Variant 12. We'll be doing MCQs today for February March 2026. Let's see what this paper has brought for us today. Moving forward, MCQ number 1. MCQ number 1 says, what could cause a reduction in the factors of production in a country? Now we all know there are four factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Now they're asking, out of these four factors, what would cause a reduction in the factors of production in a country? Option says, A says a decrease in the population, B says a discovery of new resources, C says an advance in technology, and D says an increase in the unemployment rate. Now we want a decrease in the factors of production. Now notice option B and C are all both going to lead towards an increase in the factors of production. So we can straight away chop B and C. But what about option A and D? D says an increase in the unemployment rate. Now an unemployment rate, if it's going to increase, it's point towards inefficiency, right? It points towards inefficiency. That means that part of the labor force was already a part of the labor force. It was unemployed and it has risen. But then when we're talking about a reduction in the factors of production, we are talking about an entire shift of the PPC inwards. What are we talking? We are talking about a shift of the PPC inwards. So that means there is either a reduction in the quantity or the quality of factors of production. So it's option A, which says a decrease in population. Right? Now, it could either be maybe because labor force has migrated, or it could either be because death rate has risen. Any of the reasons could be. So for number 1, the shading A as the correct response. MCQ number 2. MCQ number 2 says a government reduces social security spending by $10 billion in order to increase defense spending by $10 billion. So now what is government doing? It is reallocating its spending, right? It's shifting its spending from social security to defense spending, right? So now what is this an example of? A says expansionary fiscal policy, B market forces, C price stability, D reallocation. So just A, B, C, 3 are all incorrect. It's a reallocation of resources. That means the government is still spending. However, it has decided now to shift its resources from social security spending, from unemployment spending, or from pensions to defense spending. All right, moving forward, MCQ number 3. The diagram displays a PPC curve. Now, what is showing? It's displaying an economy located at point X on an initial PPC, that's PPC1. Now, the government would like to move to point Y on PPC2. Now, what is the government trying to do? It's trying to move towards a higher PPC, outwards, shift. Now, from point X, it wishes to move towards point Y. Now, you notice the vertical axis displays consumer goods, the horizontal displays the capital goods. Now, there I have displayed 4 options, and now they're asking us which policy is likely to achieve this outcome. Which outcome? Moving towards a higher PPC. Now, we know whenever any economy is trying to shift towards a higher PPC, it either has to do so by increasing the quantity or the quality of its factors of production. That means there has to be an increase in the productive potential of the economy. So there are two ways: the quality or the quantity of the factors of production. Now, keeping that in mind, let's look at the options available. Option A says cut indirect taxes on consumer goods. B says encourage the immigration of skilled labor into the country. C says train the unemployed to help them get jobs. And D says transfer resources from the production of capital to the production of consumer goods. Now, A says cut indirect taxes on consumer goods. Now, this is unrelated. If you're going to be reducing indirect taxes in consumer goods, it's not going to bring about any changes in the productive potential. It's going to be increasing the spending, but it will not increase the productive potential. What do we want? We want the productive potential to increase. Right? We want the productive potential to increase. B says encourage the immigration of skilled labor into the country. Yes, that's the correct answer. We want an import, we want an influx of people into the country that are skilled so that more of goods are produced. Right? C says train the unemployed to get them their jobs. If we are, if it cannot be option C because this would be that you are reducing your inefficiency. You are reducing your inefficiency. So this will not increase the productive potential. Transfer resources from production of capital goods to the production of consumer goods. That means you are still on the same PVC and you're just reallocating your resources. So it's not C, it's not D, it's B. So for 3, we'll change B as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 4. MCQ number 4 says, what is likely to reduce the price of an airline's flights? So why do you think there would be a reduction in the ticket or the charges of an airline? A says increased competition from new airline companies. B says increased demand. C says increased fuel prices. D says increased wages. Now notice if wages increase, if fuel prices increase, or if demand increase, all will cause the price to increase. But what are we saying? The price to fall. So the correct answer is option A, when increased competition is actually causing the airline to reduce its prices. So for 4, we'll check in A as the correct answer. All right. Moving forward, MCQ number 5. MCQ number 5 displays a demand and a supply diagram. Now, what has it done? The government has placed a minimum price. Right? Now, what is the government trying to do? What is happening? It displays the market for a good. Now, if the current disequilibrium price is at P1, what will need to happen to adjust the market equilibrium at point Z? Now they're saying, no, it's not minimum price. Now they're saying at the current moment, the market is in not in equilibrium, it's in disequilibrium position, right? It's at P1. So now they're saying, how will it come back to Z? Now, if it wants to come back to Z, notice first what is happening. This is the demand and this is the supply. So this is excess. So in order to get rid of that, we want to come back to point Z. Now they're saying, how can the economy come back to point Z? Now it would need to reduce the supply and it would need to increase the demand. So there has to be a contraction in the supply and an extension in demand. Right? So if the demand increases, so eventually we'll reach Z. So it has to be option A. So 5 will shade in A as the correct answer. B says the demand curve will need to shift to the right from X to Y. If you shift the demand curve, what would happen? The price would rise. So it cannot be B. The government will need to set a minimum price of P1. If the government sets a minimum price of P1, excess supply would still be there and the price would still be higher. The price will not come back. So it cannot be C. The supply curve will need to shift to the left. If you shift the supply curve, again what happens? The price rises and the quantity reduces. So it's not B, it's not C, it's not D. We did it graphically and we saw it. So the only way to do it is through A. So for 5, we shade in A. Moving forward, number 6. MCQ number 6 talks about price elasticity of this demand. They are asking us which combination of changes in price and quantity demanded would yield a PED of negative 0.1. So now they want the answer to come to negative 0.1. Now we know price elasticity of demand is equals to percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in price. Right? So now we want the answer to be a negative 0.1. Now they're saying which combination. So now what we can do is you can choose the each combinations and you'll plug in one by one, and whichever is yielding you this answer, you can choose that combination. So it has to be B, a negative 1 divided by 10 is a negative 0.1, right? So it has to be B. So for 6, we'll shade in B as the correct answer. Easy. Moving forward, MCQ number 7. What is the key feature of the market economic system? Now, which is the key highlight? What differentiates a market economic system from the other two types of economic systems? A says would the private and the public sectors play an important role? No. B says competition between firms result in lower prices and more choices for consumers. Yes, that's correct. C says the government always intervenes to reduce market failure and increase competition. No, that's not the case. D says the transfer of ownership of private sector assets to the public sector. That's never the case, right? So 7, it's B. Where there are lots of producers, there's lots of competition, which cause, because what happens? Price mechanism, right? It's an equilibrium. It's where the demand and the supply meet, right? So for 7, you'll shade in B as the correct answer. Moving forward, in MCQ number 8. 8 says some private sector firms in a free market allocate resources inefficiently. So now they're allocating resources inefficiently and causing external cost. Which economic concept are we talking about? External cost, inefficiency is what? Market failure. So for 8, we'll shade in C. It cannot be opportunity cost because opportunity cost, we're not talking about any alternative uses. It's not diseconomies of scale because we are not talking about cost. Are we talking about average cost? No. It's not specialization because we are not talking about specialization. We are not talking about how an economy is good at producing particular types of goods, right? We're not talking about division of labor. We're not talking about specialization. So it's C. MCQ number 9. A government gives farmers a subsidy of $5 per kilo to supply food in the open market, where X is the equilibrium position. So now this is the scenario. S1 is the initial supply curve, D1 is the demand curve, and the price was 13. Now the government is given a subsidy of $5 per kg. Now just seeing the effect is illustrated in the diagram shown. What will be the new equilibrium, price and quantity supplied as a result of the subsidy? So now notice if the government gives the subsidy, what would be the new price and quantity supplied? So now notice 5 per kg is the subsidy. As a result, the price has to fall, the supply has to increase. So now the supply would rise from S1 to S2. What's the equilibrium position? This is the equilibrium position where the price is 11 and the equilibrium quantity is 25. So it has to be option B. So for 9, we'll shade in B as the correct answer. Why we didn't select 8 and 20? Because here the supply has risen to 25 and that's not the equilibrium situation. It's where the demand and the supply meet. And the entire incidence of subsidy has not fallen onto the price. Right? Alright. Moving forward, MCQ number 10. Why is a central bank important to producers? A says for the collection of corporation tax. No, that FBR does. That's not the function of central bank. To maintain price stability, for the provision of loan, for the provision of savings accounts. C and D are all performed by commercial banks. It's maintenance of price stability, right? The government ensures that inflation is maintained. The central bank ensures that inflation is maintained at a particular level, right? It tries to intervene. So for 10, it's B. Moving forward, MCQ number 11. What might have caused savings to rise faster than incomes in a particular year? Now, why do you think that even though incomes were rising, yet savings rose at a rate higher than incomes? A says incomes increased at a greater rate than inflation. B says increased consumer confidence leading to increased consumer spending. C says interest rates fell leading to a fall in the return on savings. D says the rate of income tax increase. Now notice if B, C and D will all cause savings to fall. Why? Because if income tax rises, so people would have less disposable income. They'll spend less, they'll save less. Interest rates fell. If interest rates are going to fall, they are not going to be inclined, they are not going to be attracted towards saving. Increased consumer confidence leading to increased consumer spending. If consumers are spending more, they will be saving less. So B, C, and D are all eliminated. So we are left with A. But then the logic also say that it's A. Why? Because incomes increase at a greater rate than inflation. That means that real GDP rose, real income rose, right? The income rose in the real terms. So for 11, it has to be A. Number 12. On average, doctors earn more than bus drivers. We all know that. Now, which change would be likely to reduce the earning gap between doctors and bus drivers? So now they're trying to ask, how can you reduce this disparity between bus drivers and doctors? A says a decrease in the profits earned by bus companies. So if the profits reduce, the gap is going to widen, not reduce. A decrease in the qualifications needed to be a doctor. Yes. So if less qualifications are required, again, doctors would not be earning that high, right? So for 12, it's B. Why can't we see an increase in the demand for medical care? If demand is going to increase for medical care, doctors would earn more, so the disparity or the gap is going to widen and not reduce. An increase in the number of people passing the driving test. If people are passing the driving test more, the supply is going to increase and the bus drivers are going to be then earning less because there's going to be excess supply. So again, the gap is going to widen and not reduce. So it's not A, it's not D, C, it's not D, it's B. For 12, we shaded in B. All right, moving forward, MCQ number 13. A car manufacturer has increased the amount of specialization. So this means specialization is increased, which diagram would display the impact on the market for the manufacturer's car. The specialization will cause the output to increase, the supply to increase. Notice A and B are all causing changes in the demand. So we'll chop A, we'll chop B. C and D are bringing in changes in the supply curve. So now the supply curve has shifted outwards from S1 to S2. So when specialization occurs, the price has to fall and the quantity supplied has to increase. So it's D for MCQ number 13. I hope this is clear. Moving forward, MCQ number 14. A group of workers in a firm joined their trade union. So now there are workers who now have joined trade union. What would the union be expected to do? So now what do they think would the union be doing for them? What services would they be providing to these workers? The union would be providing to the workers. Arrange for labor saving technology to be introduced. So if labor saving technology is going to be introduced, these people are going to be laid off. That's not the job of trade union. Trade union has to protect the rights and the working conditions, look after these workers, right? B says discuss safety issues in the workplace and employee. Yes, that's correct. They are more concerned with how they are going to work, right, with the working conditions, which shouldn't be. C says ensure job security by promoting the firm's products through advertising. That's not the job. Advertising is not the job of trade union. D says negotiate new contracts with major buyers of the firm's products. Again, that's not the job of trade union. That's the job of the workers. Right? So it's not A, it's not C, it's not D, it's B for 14. We shaded in B as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 15. MCQ number 15 displays different output levels. They've displayed total fixed cost, they've displayed total variable cost. Now they've given us four options. Now they're saying what can be concluded from the data. So now we'll answer this question by looking at each option. A says average fixed cost remains constant. So now what we'll do is we'll make a column for average fixed cost. right? Now, how will we calculate average fixed cost? We'll divide total fixed cost by output level. Each output level, for each output level, we'll divide the total fixed cost. So now 1000 divided by 5 would give us 200. Then we'll get 100. 3000 divided by 15, we'll get a 66. Or a 66. And so 60. And this would be 50. They say average fixed cost remains constant. No, average fixed cost is constantly falling. So it's not A. B says average total cost rises. Now, first we need to calculate total cost, then we'll calculate average total cost. So, total cost will be total fixed cost plus total variable cost, and then we'll divide it by each output level. So, this has to be 2000. 2000 divided by 5. 2000 divided by 5 would give us 400. Then 2000 plus 1000 would give us a 3000. 3000 divided by 10 would give us a 300. Then we'll get a 266.67. And finally, we got a 250. So they were saying average total cost rises, average total cost kept on falling. So it's not B. C says average variable cost remains constant. This is total variable cost. We'll calculate average variable cost. How? We'll divide total variable cost by output level. So 1000 divided by 5. For the first one, we'll get what? We'll get 200. 2000 divided by 10. Again, we get a 200. 3000 divided by 15. 15 2s is 30. Again, a 200. 4000 divided by 20. Again, we get a 200. So again, what did we get? We got the correct answer. That is average variable cost remained constant. It was 200, right? So for 15, we'll shade it C. Total cost falls. We calculated total cost. Total cost kept on increasing, right? First it was 2000, then it was 3000, then it was 4000, then it was 5000. It kept on rising. It's not D. So 15, we'll shade it in C. I hope it's clear. Moving forward, MCQ number 16. MCQ number 16 says, what allows a monopoly to charge a high price and still make a profit? Number of substitute products, we know monopoly doesn't have any substitute products. So it cannot be many. Barriers to entry has to be high. So no substitutes and high barriers. So for 16, we'll shade in C as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 17. We are halfway through the paper. Which government actions are primarily aimed at achieving an international impact? So now if you are achieving an international impact, which action would it lead to? Which government actions will lead to? Setting a minimum wage, depreciating the exchange rate, deregulating industry, introducing tariffs. Yes, tariffs and exchange rate are all talking about what? International trade. So that is talking about international arena. So it has to be a yes and a yes. So let's look for a yes and a yes in this aspect. It's here and it's here. Deregulating industry and setting a minimum wage are both internal matters, so not necessarily external. So for 17, we should in B as the correct answer. Number 18. Governments aim to encourage stable prices because inflation can result in a current account deficit in the BOP. So the government wants to have less fluctuation in inflation rate, less fluctuation in the price level. And so that the BOP, the current account, is not in deficit. How does inflation contribute to the current account deficit? So now they're asking us, how do you think inflation would cause a current account deficit? Let's look at the options. Countries have to barter manufactured goods for raw materials. That's incorrect. Goods manufactured for export lose their competitiveness. Yes, that's the correct answer. Why? Because if there's inflation, the price of the goods is going to rise. So when the price of the goods is going to rise, the suppliers or the manufacturers are going to price their goods high. So as a result, in the international market, those goods are going to be priced high and they are going to lose their price competitiveness because the neighboring countries, the trading partners would have their goods at relatively lower price. So our exports would lose their competitiveness. So for 18, it has to be B. Number of foreign visitors increased, spending on imported goods reduced, they all are incorrect. So for 18, it has to be B. Number 19. Which feature of a tax is not desirable? That means out of these four options, three features of the tax would be desirable except for one. Certainty regarding the payment. If you know how much you need to pay, you want that. So it cannot be A. Convenient payment method. You want the tax to be paid easily. But they're saying it is not desirable. Equal payments by all citizens. Yes, that's not desirable because those who are earning high must pay more and those who are earning less must be able to pay less. This is flexibility in different economic circumstances. So you want flexibility, you want convenient payment, you want certainty. It's equal payments is something which you do not want because that would create a burden on those who are earning less. So for 19, we'll shade in C as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 20. What is an example of expansionary monetary policy? Monetary policy is what? Money supply and interest rate. So when you're talking about expansionary monetary policy, which means an increase in money supply and a decrease in interest rate. Keeping that in mind, let's look at the options. A reduction in money supply is a contractionary monetary policy. So it cannot be A. A reduction in income tax, we are talking about fiscal policy. It's not B. A reduction in trade union power, that has nothing to do with monetary policy. A reduction in the rate of interest, yes, that's correct because we're talking about expansionary monetary policy. For 20, we'll shade in D as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 21. A country has high unemployment, low inflation. So at the current moment, there are lots of people are unemployed and inflation is less, so there's relatively price stability. To reduce unemployment, the government increases its spending on education and training, causing a budget deficit. Now, the government wanted to reduce the amount of people who were out of jobs, so it gave training and education, but it resulted in a budget deficit. That means the government spent more than it earned by way of taxes. Now, they're saying what is the likely effect on inflation in the short and in the long run. So, now notice if it's caused a budget deficit, that means the government spending was greater than its earnings, right? So, in the short run, what would happen to inflation? The price level would rise. Inflation will increase in the short run, but in the long run, it would fall by because there would be an increase in productive potential. Once these people are employed, aggregate supply curve would increase, and as a result, the surge in the prices would be offset by an increase in the level of output of goods and services. So, the price level would fall. So initially it would increase, in the long run it would decrease. So for 21, we shade in C as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 22. The following information was published by an economy central bank, in which case was real GDP the highest. They given nominal, they given the rate. What should we need to do? We need to subtract and see whichever yields the highest, which will cause the highest increase in the GDP. So 2 minus 1 is a 1. 7 minus 5 is a positive 2. 9 and then subtract minus 13 is going to give us a negative 4. And 10 minus 11 would give us a negative 1. So which is yielding the highest increase in the GDP? B, which is a plus 2. So for 22, we'll shade in B as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 23. MCQ number 23 displays changes in the CPI. They displayed energy, food, housing, transport. Now notice all are witnessing certain increases in prices. Now the thing, what will be the likely consequence of this? Interest rates will need to be reduced. There will be more equal distribution of income. There will be cost plus inflation. There will be demand side deflation. Now the prices are rising, so it's not deflation. Deflation is a fall in the rate of inflation. Interest rates will need to be reduced. You got no data to support that. Equal distribution of income, the prices are rising, you cannot talk about equal distribution of income. Yes, there would be cost plus inflation because the cost of living is increasing. So for 23, we should in C because the basic necessities and the basket of goods, the price is rising, right? So for 23, we shade in C. 24. Cuba is said to be moving towards a market economic system. What is the most likely impact on the pattern of employment? Now, what would happen? A decrease in the proportion of workers employed in the public sector, a decrease in the proportion of workers employed in the private sector, a decrease in the proportion of workers employed in small firms, a decrease in the proportion of workers employed in the tertiary sector. When we are moving towards a market economic system, so more people would have been employed in the tertiary. So you chop D. A decrease in the proportion of workers employed in small firms. You cannot say about that. A decrease in the proportion of workers employed in the private sector? No, private sector would increase and public sector would decrease. So it has to be A because you're moving from being government owned towards private move, right? Private sector would be larger. What is not a component of HDI? So HDI has expected years of schooling, it has income per head, it has life expectancy. What it does not have, it does not have stock of natural resources. And they're asking what is not a component of HDI. So we'll shade in D for 25. Moving forward, MCQ number 26. What could explain the rise in a country's population despite a fall in the birth rate? Now, even though the birth rate is falling, yet the population is increasing. Why? A birth rate that exceeds the death rate, but they're saying the birth rate is falling. So it cannot, a birth rate that exceeds the death rate. Yes, that's correct. That means even though the birth rate is falling, yet it is higher than the death rate. That's correct. B says a death rate that exceeds the birth rate. So the death rate is more, then the birth rate in the population would fall and not rise. So it cannot be B. Net immigration exceeds the birth rate. So if people are leaving more, again the population would fall. Net immigration exceeds the death rate, again that's incorrect. So it's not B, it's not C, it's not D. It has to be A. Why? Because the birth rate, even though it was falling, that's what the question is saying, but the fall in the birth rate is more, it's less than the death rate. That means a birth rate is exceeding the death rate, right? So 26 we should in A. 27. What is the basis for specialization at a national level? Now, why would a country specialize? A country would specialize for this economies of scale, it would never do that. Increase cost of production, if cost of production increasing, why would it specialize? Superior resource allocation, wide variety of goods. When you talk about specialization, we are talking about production of one particular type of goods and services, right? So it's superior resource allocation. It's best able to utilize its resources, right? So it has to be C. 27 will shade in C as the correct answer. Moving forward, 28. The import of a product from country X into country Y has been banned. What is this an example of? So when you ban an import from some country, what type of restriction is that? It's an embargo. 28, it's A. Moving forward, 29. What is necessary to be able to operate a fixed exchange rate system? So now, if you want your exchange rate to hover between a particular band, right? So what does a state bank needs? What does a central bank needs? It needs to have a large reserve. It needs to have reserves of foreign currency to be able to buy and sell in order to maintain that rate, a fixed exchange rate, right? So for 29, it has to be D. Final MCQ 30. A developing economy has a surplus in its trade in goods and service. Trade in goods, 75 billion. Deficit on its services, while its current account is in balance. Which values for primary income and secondary income would result in the current account being in balance? So now what we'll do is we'll make a T account. We'll put in inflows here. We'll put in outflows here. Now notice surplus was in trade in goods of 75 billion. That was positive. There was a deficit in services of 25 billion. Now they're saying what would be the value for primary income and secondary income such that both side balances, right? So now what we'll do, you'll keep on plugging in the figures and you'll see if you put a surplus of 40 billion over here and you put a deficit of 90 billion over here, notice this is going to give you a negative 115 and this would give you a positive 115 billion. So what happens? Both sides are balanced. So it's D. You keep on plugging A, B, and C, and you'll see all three will not give you a balance. It's D that will give you a balance. That is why for 30, we shade in D. If you put in a deficit of 20 billion over here, see, if you put in a deficit of 20 billion and you put a surplus of 120, would it balance? No, it won't balance. So it cannot be A. Deficit of 30 billion and a deficit of 70 billion. So outflows are more. So again, it's not B. A surplus of 35 billion and a surplus of 15 billion. Again, your inflows are more. So there's nothing over here. So it's again not C. So it's not A, it's not B, it's not C. It has to be D, where a surplus of 40 billion over here and a deficit of 90 billion over here would means that your inflows are equals to your outflows and your current account would be in a situation of balance. I hope you understood and enjoyed solving this paper with me. Stay tuned, subscribe, happy learning.